Excellent. So welcome everyone to the curriculum strategy walkthrough session this morning. I hope that everybody that was able to attend last Thursday is back again. If you weren't able to attend last Thursday, don't worry, a recording is coming out today. And I'll talk about this a little later on also, that we'll have our training website that we previewed on Thursday will be hopefully live by the end of the week, and we can send that out, and that will have the link to the recordings on it. So it'll be an easy place for you to access all of this information. So let me go ahead and start our slideshow, and I will share this momentarily. Here we go. And we are going to start from the top, and I will, and panelists, just give me a thumbs up that you can see that that's an excellent. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So again, welcome to Train the Trainer Curriculum Strategy overview session. And we are going to talk about some housekeeping items first of all. So first, as I mentioned, this session is being recorded and it will be available after this session. I'll send out a link, but as I mentioned, it will also be on our training website, which I will be excited to send out a link to when it is live later this week. It is looking great and has definitely been the product of a lot of people's work and ideas, and I think you're all really going to like it. Second part is to please hold your questions till the end of the presentation. I say that not to be mean or to say, you know, you can't ask us questions that we can answer. I say that just because we might answer your question throughout the presentation at some point, in which case then you won't have to worry about typing that answer in, our question in, and we won't have to capture it. You'll already know that it's been answered. Other thing I want to mention is, remember, we have the chat feature and we have the Q&A feature, just like in our by our user group meetings. Make sure that you're using the chat for any type of informal discussion that doesn't include a question. And if you do have a question, please make sure you're using that question and answer feature, because we want to make sure that they're captured and recorded so that we can create FAQ documents like we have so far. We want to make sure that everybody's questions are being answered and captured. So again, chat is for chatting, questions for questions. And that is what I just said. I didn't even realize those are the last two housekeeping items. But again, chat is for comments only, or for saying good morning or saying hi to someone, and the Q&A box is for questions. We do want to make sure that we are capturing them. Now, we'll talk a little bit about our presenters today. If you did not hear me introduce myself last Thursday, my name is Sarah Lewis, and I am the training lead for the new platform, which I am so excited about. I am honored to be in this role. It is something that is a passion of mine, is training adults, especially on software platforms. It's something that I find really rewarding, and I am so happy to be leading the effort for the eVA team when it comes to training. So Jamie and Amani are the next two people I'm gonna ask to introduce themselves. You probably won't hear them on today's call as much. They'll be joining us again at the end for our question and answer session. But I really did want to highlight these two because they are our CGI leads as far as training goes, and they have just been absolutely wonderful. So I would like them to introduce themselves, because they have done so much work so far, and we're still only at the beginning, and they also have to deal with me, which means they have to be patient and, and be willing to answer all the questions that I have, which they always do a great job. And that's just the very tip of everything they've been working on. So Jamie, do you want to go first and introduce yourself, and then we'll, Amani, you can then go after Jamie?
Yep, sounds good. Thank you for that introduction. So I am the project manager for CGI over the training and change management aspects and how we're involved in that. I've been with CGI for going on 12 years, and I am located in Richmond. So actually we are right across the street from where the eVA team sits. So very close by. I am newer to the eVA project. I know many of my CGI coworkers have been here for 20 years or so. So we are deeply invested in the success of eVA and have some real strong relationships that we are excited now to go forward with training and help this transition be as smooth and successful as possible.
Thank you, Jamie. And Imani?
Yes, hi everyone, good morning. So my name is Imani Robinson. I am the CGI training lead for the new eVA implementation. I've been working very closely with Sarah, Jamie, and Kaylee since earlier this year, and just very excited to be here. So I've been with CGI for about 15 years and primarily a focus on training management and organizational change management. And so like Sarah said, today I'll be a bit behind the scenes, but I'm hoping that in the future, we'll be able to kind of engage with several of you. And like I said, just very excited to be here and looking forward to continuing this onboarding for Train the Trainer.
Thanks, Imani. And then if you didn't hear me speak about this last Thursday, we also have another awesome vendor that we're working with named InfoPro, who's helping us create all of the training assets that you'll be reviewing. And even for a big part of these presentations, putting together the presentations, putting the data in exciting ways to view it. So it's not just data, dry data. They're making sure that it's something that's entertaining for a Monday morning or a Thursday morning. So they have just been absolutely fantastic. And Kaylee is their lead over there at InfoPro. So I'm going to let her introduce herself also, because she will be leading most of the call today. And they have also, in addition to CGI, been fantastic resources and really helping us make this transition a smooth one.
Well, thank you, Sarah. You can just follow me around everywhere. We'll accept accolades for the team. Thank you. Yeah, so my name is Kaylee McGinnity. Unlike I think most folks on this call, I'm out in Chicago, Illinois. I'm a senior learning experience architect with InfoPro Learning. And so me and my team have had a lot of fun kind of being creative about this process. And so we started all the way back from analyzing what the system changes would be, what training is out there, and we'll talk about that more throughout the presentation today, but we'll follow the process all the way forward until ultimately it's in front of the learners and making sure that they have the best experience possible. So I'm excited to talk through some of that today. Thank you.
Awesome. And then after I do some Zoom reminders, I will turn it over. But as a reminder again, chat feature, we also have the reactions in case anybody wants to use those and doesn't want to type in anything in the chat. Feel free to use any of them. I mean, I would be partial to thumbs up and the heart emoji, because that means you are understanding everything that we're going through. We don't have any polls or annotations today, but those are just things to keep in mind for any future sessions and absolutely for those virtual instructor-led trainings. So I will go ahead after this and I will turn it over.
Fantastic. Sorry, just putting my video back on here. So today we have our curriculum strategy walkthrough session, of course. Before today, you would have had an opportunity to attend the kickoff session and get to know a little bit more about that. In terms of how we start this off, actually, Sarah, you want to flip to the next one. I want to make sure we have a chance to hear from folks about what were your takeaways from that kickoff session? And you can go ahead and put it into the chat directly. What do you remember? Want to get your minds back in that right frame of mind to remember what we had talked about in the past. And just make sure that you've got the that to field set to everyone so we can all see. Were you surprised by what you heard? Was there anything surprising that maybe you weren't expecting or was different than what your expectations were? Looks like folks are typing. We'll give you a moment. Learning paths based on use of the system. Absolutely. We're going to talk about that in more detail today as well. Thank you, Jacqueline. New lingo. Yes, we've got a lot of new terminology and different ways of referring to different concepts, both within the system and from that learning instructional design perspective. We'll continue using those today, so feel free to put any comments in the chat if there's specific words that stand out that you're not familiar with. Concerns of how many paths we'll have to teach. That's an interesting question. And as we go through today, we'll talk a little bit more about that learning journey and what it means in terms of the overlap of those learning paths and the assets that are shared between them. And we'll make sure that hopefully your comfort level is a bit higher by the end of the session today. Thank you, Crystal, for sharing that. Okay. Well, feel free to keep adding them in. We'd love to look at those memories or reactions. Some new ones. Required training avenues based on the end user's positions. Exactly. Time transfer and learning of the new system. Yes, we have a lot of goals related to seat time and ultimately streamlining. So these are all really great points that hopefully we can get into a little bit more detail on today. So I'm glad that we can make that connection from the previous session and hopefully provide that extra level of detail. So for now, I think, Sarah, we can put forward our agenda for today. We'll start by covering just a little bit more about the learning design philosophy that we had coming into this entire program, what considerations we had, what we know about the modern learner, and really how that influences our design and decision making. We'll go into a little bit then about the analysis process and our findings. That will include everything from what inputs did we have, what did the data tell us, what are some of the main recommendations that we have for modernizing the curriculum, because we know it's important for you to see behind the curtain. It's not always as helpful to just be handed something that you need to teach. It's good to know where it came from and kind of what informed that process. So we'd love to share that with you. As has been, I think, mentioned in several comments now about the learning journey approach, we'll talk more about what that means and how things are divvied up, making sure it's still very clear to everyone involved what is unique and what might add a little bit of additional expertise in terms of the different assets. But I think ultimately the good news is that there is a lot of shared features to that. So hopefully that should cut down, again, on the effort required for that specialization. And of course, we'll save time at the end, wrap up some questions, anything that comes up, of course, continue. As Sarah said, at the end, we'll have an opportunity to check the Q&A tab and address those questions all together. Right, I think with that being said, exactly, we can put into learning design philosophy. So these points on the slide, these are the kinds of things that we think about throughout the process. First, learning as the campaign. Learning is not a one-time event, but rather something ongoing that reinforces not only the good habits and behaviors over time, but also just continues to keep everything in that ecosystem ongoing and top of mind. And we'll dive into this a bit more on the next slide. As far as blended learning modalities, kind of is what it sounds like. Different content calls for different formats. And some styles just resonate more strongly with some learners than others. It's important that we have a variety, maybe it's videos, e-learning, maybe it's those practice opportunities where it's kind of like a simulated environment. All of those serve different purposes. And again, we'll continue talking more about what those mean as well. For high content relevance, that low seat time, the focus here is on the most critical information or behaviors, and that lets us rule out anything that doesn't add a lot of value for a certain role. So when we talk about that journey curation, again, the goal is not to invent a whole bunch of more individualized things, but rather to make sure that we're using everyone's time effectively, that we're not forcing them to sit through something that they'll never actually use on the job. And vice versa, we want to make sure that they're getting plenty of time on those tasks that they're doing very frequently. In terms of learn by doing, learn by failing, this is one of my favorites, one of the things that's always most present in my mind. I think we often learn the most when our expectations fail us, and we need to readjust our mental schema. So in learning design, we often use the phrase goal, do, fail, correct. And to put that into completely non-EVA context, just for a moment for the sake of understanding. Imagine that you wanted to learn to juggle. That could be your goal. You want to be able to juggle for 10 seconds straight without dropping a ball. Next step is to do it. You just have to, pick them up and try to start tossing them. As you fail, you drop the ball, or you miss it, or your hand's not in the right place, whatever that is. That teaches you something. Oh, I need to be ready. I need to anticipate this coming this other direction, or whatever the case may be. But through that learning, you're able to correct it and make the adjustments. So applying that similarly to EVA, maybe you're expecting the system to work in one way. Your goal may be to create a requisition. It could be anything. But as you do it, maybe you're clicking the wrong buttons, you're looking at the wrong part of the screen, or you don't notice a certain alert. When you make that mistake, the beautiful thing about training is that we can provide feedback and coaching that will help you make those corrections. Again, all the more important reason to have those situated learning environments, representing real world situations. And then finally on here, engagement with peers and experts. I think that'll resonate with everyone on this call, especially true in the VILT setting. It's a chance to think practically. How does this apply to me? Asking questions, troubleshooting, and of course the facilitator, the trainer, plays a very important role in that, in building credibility and making sure that the learners know what they're doing is worthwhile and going to help them. So I want to get into a couple more points related to this. Actually, in the next slide, we can talk through, yes, here we go. So first, learning as a journey. Part of viewing learning as a journey entails recognizing really the complete overarching ecosystem that a learner is situated in while approaching the new system functionality in this case. We can provide training, but that's really not, not where it ends. So if we look at this graphic, kind of that top row there, we have different goals at different points. So starting with simple awareness. And I know there's been a lot of different communications out there about, first of all, this change is coming. People know to anticipate it. They're aware of the change. Certain knowledge about, what is changing. Skills and application that goes more into what does it mean for me? How do I apply these changes? What does it impact in my own workflow? Assessment, what it sounds like, checking understanding. But in this case, we also have really incredible support teams available to help moving forward in the future if there are any issues. And reference materials, again, those quick reference guides or job aids that people can refer to after the fact, just for those quick, I needed this one detail, or if I just had a screenshot of this, it would make so much sense. And so we're able to provide those too. And so you can see then some examples of that towards the bottom there. We go all the way from those transition webinars and some overview videos up at the top of the curriculum. And we get more and more complex as we move forward. So demo videos, infographics. Eventually we get into the more complex pieces like e-learning or the guided practice in the sandbox environment. Again, VILT would qualify as that. That's very interactive and the opportunity to apply. To continue with assessments. Actually, it's an important point here for assessment that really qualifies in two different areas. So the kind of traditional definition of assessment is it's something that we present to the learner. It's scored. Maybe they need to answer a certain number of questions to prove that they understand the material at the desired threshold. But kind of the flip side of that is that they can assess their experience through surveys and feedback. And again, I think that has multiple goals. Not only does it give them a chance to reflect on what they've done, was this a good experience? Would I do this again? Might I check back to this another time in the future? But really, ultimately, it's giving us very important details about how the experience went. The obvious thing that comes to mind is if there were any gaps or something that was confusing to learners, this is how we learn about it so that we can fix it. And conversely, if there's something that people really like that's resonating with everyone, we want to make sure that A, we're not losing that, with any future changes, and B, that we continue to build more in that same direction as much as possible. So all of this together, again, along with customer care, user support, quick reference guides, it's all about that full, complete learning ecosystem. And so as learners move through the process, our goal is for them to embrace change, recognize the relevance or the value that the learning has for them, of course, build their confidence so they feel more comfortable with the materials and with the system itself, and really just trying to make sure that they are able to engage with the system and succeed in the task that they're trying to accomplish. So I realize there's quite a bit on that slide. Again, I might hear some questions on that one later, and that's perfectly okay. I do want to wrap up into that same thought as well here, the modern learner. And this might seem familiar to some of us. This is a slide from Burson by Deloitte. And so if we could just start by defining the modern learner. I mean, you can see some of those big keywords: overwhelmed, distracted, impatient. Might be a bit small, but some of the statistics say, for example, most learners won't watch videos longer than 4 minutes. Workers now get interrupted as frequently as every 5 minutes. Ironically, often by work applications and collaboration tools and things that are meant to increase productivity. And then, of course, the big one on there, 1% of a typical work week is all that employees have to focus on training and development. And so given maybe a 40-hour work week, that's under 30 minutes a week. Obviously, in this situation, it's a bit more of a dedicated effort, but we need to keep in mind that this is, taking people out of their typical flow of work. So we need to be very mindful of the time that they do have available. In fact, I'm sure even on this webinar, you're getting pings and different email alerts coming in. I see I am as well, so it keeps happening. But with this in mind, we do have opportunities to sort of counteract this. Excuse me. So for example, we can provide more streamlined curriculum, realistic practice opportunities that help feel more engaging and more valuable. And of course, providing on-demand performance support tools, on demand being that key word. So these are all, again, different considerations that we've kept in mind just to make sure that we are providing the ultimate learner experience wherever possible. Excuse me. So I think, Sarah, I think we can go ahead and flip into, this will be our chance to sort of talk about more of those analysis findings and really what we did in that process, bearing in mind all of these different learning philosophy considerations. So first on this slide, you can see we've got some of the primary analysis inputs. And so throughout that process, lots of different activities were involved, starting with just finding out what we know, what's already out there. So we started with discussions with key stakeholders, both from COVA and CGI, getting to talk to the people who have been working with this most closely and best understand the need. Kind of scaffolding from there, we looked at all sorts of existing documentation, including the functional designs for the system itself, any existing user guides or demo videos that had already been created. You see there points 4 and 5 sort of go together. We looked at the existing eVA training, the self-paced learning for the kind of as it had been systems, I think 7 different courses there. And kind of conversely looking at the off-the-shelf Evalua Academy materials. So it's kind of neither one was quite exactly a perfect match, but kind of got half and half from there in terms of what is the actual system, what new features might be included, but sort of tailored to best meet the needs of these users. And so pulling bits and pieces from each of those. We also had course evaluation data from Absorb, and that was eye-opening. We actually have a slide for that coming up, but all of these pieces together helped get a fuller picture of what is the current state, where are we headed, and what are those differences that we need to be most mindful of. So actually part of that process, I think on the next slide, we can talk about what the process was like for content mapping and task analysis, which we've been calling the heat map. And this picture, it's got quite a bit on there. Not expected to be able to read anything, no worries. If you can't, you don't need to zoom in. But just, this is meant to represent that it became a very complex process that followed many different steps. So we started by listing all of the existing content that's considered relevant for the roles that were defined as being in scope. And that came from a lot of those inputs on the previous slide. We worked with subject matter experts, or SMEs, as you'll see the acronym on the slide, to add very granular details up to the very specific task level of what would you be doing, what document might you refer to, what's applicable here, what common mistakes might happen here. From there, we were able to specify, for example, is this something someone must know or do? And I know that seems like a very specific nuance, to differentiate between these two, but it kind of ties back to that difference between knowledge and skill. We want to make things very hands-on and practical. We're going to be focusing more on the do category, because we know that means that this user is responsible for a certain task. It's going to be a lot more relevant than something that they just kind of need to know happens by a different role that they maybe are dependent on or need to wait for. So that distinction is something we took very seriously and wanted to make sure we had correct. Working with those subject matter experts again, interviewing them, we were able to create some personas, which again, we'll talk through in more detail. But this is what helped us align not only that know and do, but every single task. Is this relevant for this person? What about this person? Are there situations when someone might need to know this? What are those differences? As part of that, you'll see in this, again, this rough heat map image you can see on the screen, we were able to identify the relevance of each topic or task to each role identified. And HML there means high, medium, low. So you can see we said, how complex is this? Is it a difficult task? How much is it changing from what the system used to be? Is this a major new functionality introduction, or is this sort of just a refresher and maybe more substantial changes happen somewhere else in the system? Those types of inputs help us identify where we need to spend the most time during training, again, just to make sure we're using everyone's time effectively. And again, they're in point 6, so that again, that helps us eliminate repetitions, any redundancies, making sure that we're very focused on a streamlined approach. And ultimately, we've created this level-based and bite-sized learning unit, group of learning units that we can, we use the phrase plug and play into different journeys to avoid cognitive overload for the learners. And as we'll get into more detail, I know this was a comment up at the earlier in this exercise. We want to make sure we're not introducing too much cognitive overload for trainers as well. We want to make sure that there is still a very clear approach in mind for who's doing what can overlap, how can we bring the experience together, even when there are different branches. So with that in mind, I think I'd like to show, yes, okay, perfect. This is some of the data that we extracted from Absorb. So this is course evaluation data on the existing training. And what's so interesting about this, we won't show you all the specific numbers and spreadsheets and charts, it got messy, but we wanted to kind of emphasize generally what the learner data said, and then more importantly, what insights, what it told us about what we can do moving forward. So you can see the first one, across all assets, the lowest average rating was 4 out of 5 stars. So all things considered, that's pretty good. It's definitely got room for improvement, but you wouldn't be too concerned or as concerned if it were 1 out of 5 stars, 2 out of 5 stars. So generally, this told us that learners find the topics relevant, and the structure itself was pretty helpful. The biggest change then is modernizing with the new system. Next up, classroom assets earned higher ratings than e-learning. This isn't all too surprising. We know, if anything, this reinforces that learners do seek out that human element. They want the opportunity to ask questions, to discuss with their colleagues. Even if it's not a formal question, it can kind of just be a quick sanity check saying, this is how I'm doing it. Have you been doing it this way? Is there a faster way to do this? Is this the right approach? Is there something more efficient? How do you save this? Even just little tiny questions helps people sync up and build that confidence that they are doing things in the most valuable way possible. We also saw that the final eMall sandbox was rated highest among e-learning. I'm not sure if everyone on the call today has completed this training themselves, but ultimately that was sort of the simulated environment, the practice opportunity where you'd be given a task and need to complete it in the safe workspace. And it's not surprising, again, that that's highest rated. We expect learners to really value the hands-on practice opportunities, that chance to get feedback, to do and to fail, as we said earlier. Conversely, the introduction was rated lowest among e-learning. Again, kind of makes sense by that same logic. Learners want to dive in quickly without that overhead. They don't need the history of eVA necessarily, or if they do, we can deliver it in a very quick, impactful way, just to make sure that we are diving in right away, building that engagement, establishing that credibility with the learners, just to make sure everyone's really motivated to continue making a good impression off the bat. Generated enthusiasm. That's one of the questions on the evaluation survey. Did these materials generate enthusiasm about the subject? And we saw sort of across the board as a pattern, had a pretty low ranking, again, globally, which tells us good information about what we can do moving forward. So learners do need to recognize the value in what they're learning. If it's, something that they don't see themselves applying on the job, or if they're not sure how it's relevant to them and what they do in their daily job tasks, they're not going to be as committed to it. They're not going to pay as much attention. So what we can do moving forward is making sure right away, what's in it for me, what's in it for the learner, that needs to be said very quickly, right away, that is, and in no uncertain terms, to make sure that the learners know right away why they should be paying attention. Participation, and we're measuring that by completion or attendance, was much lower for the classroom in the former training. Part of that, we saw there was no specific incentive or requirement for attending. And so that tells us learners are pretty unlikely to complete non-required materials. Again, thinking back to that slide we saw earlier about the modern learner, we know they've got lots of pressures on their time. They have lots of distractions and they're overwhelmed, and everyone needs everything now. And so those things are unlikely to happen unless we do incorporate it into the learning journey. And so that's something that we've been able to do moving forward with our recommendation, is to make sure, again, that everything is relevant. And we are going to go ahead and require certain types of exercises if we know that it's going to add value to the learner and to their experience. Finally on here, overall survey participation was low. Again, kind of ties to that point about anything not required is probably not going to happen. So we'll make sure moving forward, and I think even as of late, I think that had already been a change in the existing training. We'll make sure to continue that in the new training ahead, revamping the evaluation forms just to make sure we are collecting information that, like we said, allows us to make educated choices about how we make design decisions moving forward during maintenance and with any future assets. Awesome. So whereas the last slide focused on specifically the course evaluation data, here's sort of the more general take about curriculum modernization opportunities. So, and this is a bit more general. I think we maybe hit some of these points inadvertently as we went through. But the first thing we identified, I'm sure all of us could have identified, was that the materials were centered on the current or the existing system at the time. No surprises there. But of course, that means moving forward, we do want to update the content to align to the new system design. But the second part of the sentence is what's probably most key, especially in areas with the most substantial changes to features and navigation. So in our heat map exercise, that's where we kind of identified the high, medium, low. Is this a big change? Is this a small change? Is it a difficult change for people to learn? We want to spend the most time focusing on the topics that have changed most drastically, because that's where the biggest gaps, of course, are going to be. In terms of the second opportunity we identified, we saw that there were very broad training materials available by topic area, but where we want to move next is into curated role-specific learning journeys, as we've been saying, meeting the unique needs of the most common end user roles, framing content through that role relevant lens. Average of 18.5 hours to complete, just quite lengthy. So our goal is to not only reduce the overall average time to complete training, in terms of how much is their total. If someone were to complete all of it, we want that number to go down. But then we can also streamline according to role-based needs, filtering out the less critical information into job aids as opposed to time-intensive simulations. And when we put there in parentheses, less practice-worthy, it means it's not that it's not important, it's still important to know, but you might not need to go through that exercise of actually clicking it yourself or seeing how it works on your screen, because it's something a little bit more intuitive, or maybe it is something that hasn't changed from that previous system. And so there's different ways that we can evaluate that. Finally, we saw that there was generally a pretty standard flow of interaction types by lesson in the existing training. And so again, the place that we want to kind of add on here, while variety is good, and the standards are also good, we kind of have both sides of the coin there. I think ultimately we want to be engaging learners through that variety of modalities as they're best suited to the content areas. So we've given some examples there: videos, e-learning, simulations, guided practice, games, VLTs, quick guides, the list goes on. The sky's the limit. Within those, we can still have certain elements of kind of a standard structure for the sake of continuity, making sure that the learners are comfortable with the expectations. They know going in, nothing's too shocking to them that they're not able to follow along. But we do want to keep mixing things up just enough to keep their attention and keep them fully engaged. We will go into more details on those modalities in just a moment. Here we are looking at the overall end user roles. So part of our analysis exercise involved documenting a list of the overall end user roles, anyone who might be using the system. And you can see, it looks like there's an extra box there, but I can tell you what would have been there. I think what's covered there is requisitioner. You can kind of tell that we've got them grouped into 4 different categories, starting with the general public over there on the left, quickly identified that is out of scope for training. But we do kind of have then users offering goods and services to users requesting goods and services. And in colloquial terms, we might call them buyers and sellers. But of course, here we have very specific differences between these roles. So the supplier on the left, within that users requesting goods and services category, we also kind of broke it down into doers and approvers. So that first one, if it were to say requisitioner, we know that their counterpart then is someone approving the requisition or PO. Similarly, solicitation issuers, including quick quote issuers, they have their counterparts who are evaluating and approving. So we have kind of this breakdown of those 2 kind of major fields. We also had a very thoughtful consideration about keeping in mind who is providing support here. What did they need to know? And in this case, most of them need to know quite a bit. eVA customer care, vendor support, the core team, security officers, as well as account executives. Again, looking in how do these differ? In what situations might someone be helping? When do they maybe not need to know as much detail? And keeping all of that in mind for those processes. So we defined some personas, some fictitious people who we could imagine might be completing these tasks. We did that for key roles to help us focus our learning experience design on the various needs of specific end user role types. So the personas were not meant to be perfectly representative of every exact possibility of who might be using the system, but rather to give us an in-depth portrait of enough end user roles that would help us design that experience and make sure that we are meeting the full spectrum of end user needs across all categories. So for example, suppliers and requisitioners would have vastly different learning needs. We also, you'll see that each of these roles has a unique set of assignments based on what's most important to them in their job role. And you'll see that in the LMS as well. All right, so that leads to the natural question, why is it important for learners to have specialized assignments by role? Here's a look at the overall list of assets in the eVA program. This might look familiar to you from the website. I think it was pulled up briefly during the kickoff call as well. So altogether, this is approximately 13 hours of material across 67 different assets. So while 13 is much better than the 18 and a half that we saw previously, it still takes a little bit more work to make sure that we are streamlining this by role. So we started by breaking it down into 7 different functional categories. So you can see their intro, getting started, supplier management, sourcing, contracts, catalog, and P2P. Some of these are bigger than others, of course. Within a category, we wanted to still create separate requirements by role. So to consider an example, we said suppliers, requisitioners, those are very unique roles. But now imagine a solicitation issuer and a solicitation approver. These are clearly more closely connected than supplier and requisitioner. But even between those roles, they have very different scopes of responsibility. So whereas one, might need to know all about the evaluation process, how do we approve, what buttons do I have to press to do that? Obviously, both roles don't need to know that. So there's kind of these opportunities to find differences and making sure that we're not repeating anything or spending time on something that really isn't practically going to be used. And again, these different assignments for the different roles will be reflected in the LMS. All right. Not to go into those types of learning assets, and be warned, we'll do quite a bit more detail on this during the learning showcase coming up soon. But one of the methods for keeping learners engaged is to approach the content through a variety of modalities, and we'll give kind of just a preview of each of these here. So videos, as you would expect, short videos to introduce high-level concepts. We often use these at the start of a functional category, sort of that explainer video or kind of introduction, kind of transition people, get them engaged. Again, that visual approach is usually very motivating. It makes it all feel a lot more up to date and catches their interest. PDFs, quick reference guides in some cases. These might just be other forms of job aids to summarize information on the topic. And what I always recommend here, as much as possible, PDFs are often very easy. You can print them out, put them on your desk if you're so inclined. That's going to be most helpful in situations when maybe you're not completing that task every day. Maybe it's something that happens monthly or quarterly, or it only happens with a certain type of RFX that you don't use very frequently. So in those cases, it's nice to have that little, a sheet of paper at your desk handy, or a digital copy of the PDF handy. Because in those cases, you don't need to go recomplete the entire category of learning. You're of course welcome to if you have more questions at that point. But generally the goal there is to give a quick, jog your memory. Hey, you already learned about this. Here's the key takeaways. Here's what you need to click. You're just making sure that, again, we're using learners' time in a respectful manner. E-learning, interactive, self-paced learning. It includes scenarios, demonstrations, knowledge checks, as much as possible. Again, this is where we try to present the information to the learner, showing them how things work. The scenarios in this case are really helpful for making the connections between the conceptual kind of data that you're receiving, and then getting you to think about, when will I use this? How frequently will I use this? What snags might I hit? Because then by the time you're practicing, or you are in a future session, you'll be able to ask those questions. Actually, perfect segue then VILT, as they sound, group sessions to recap key points, share a live demo, address learners' questions. I'm sure you all are very familiar with this concept, of course. Again, these are usually at the end of a functional category. And, I can't leave out saying that this is very important for the learners to be able to reconcile all the different questions that they had. What have they seen in their self-paced materials? How are they making sense of it? Do they have questions? Do they need support? Is there any spot that needs reinforcement? This is very flexible and fluid, and I keep referring to that human element, but this is really where we can help on a more individualized basis based on the needs of whoever is in attendance that day. Practice, simulated environments, using that hands-on application. Sometimes this is referred to as sandbox. It's usually paired with, I'll say, one or more corresponding e-learning assets. So whereas the e-learning is sort of that show me, I want to watch and learn what I'm supposed to be doing. Practice is then where you can actually attempt it yourself. And did you hit the right buttons? If not, why not? Maybe we'll provide some coaching feedback about where you should be looking instead, or why a certain common mistake is happening and how to avoid it. So we like to provide that type of opportunity as well. Again, thinking back to that learn by doing, learn by failing, this is a safe space to fail and to learn. Before you make any mistakes in the live system, we want to prevent that from happening. Assessment, what it sounds like, it's an online assessment, typically scored. We'll have a certain thresholds for meeting the requirements, and this is typically the very last item in any functional category. We'll make sure that we're not assessing on anything that was not covered in the training. Of course, that wouldn't be too fair. So the idea is that if the learner has been fully engaged in the training materials, they really shouldn't have any problem passing the assessment. We want it to be difficult enough that there's, clearly some thought involved, but hopefully, the idea being that if they've been paying attention, if they've been reviewing all of the assets as they've been instructed, there shouldn't be any problem. And part of that VILT session beforehand can kind of be treated like a study group. If there are questions, that's the opportunity that you have to get that cleared up before the assessment. So more information about each type of learning assets, including some demonstrations, will be provided during the learning showcase coming up. So with that, oh, perfect, Sarah read my mind. I'll maybe just say, as a quick reminder, your next step will be to review the process flow infographic. We'll make that available very soon, followed by the learning showcase, in which we will go into more detail on those different modalities. After that session, that's when you'll be expected to begin completing the self-paced learning assets, reviewing the trainer guides for the VILT sessions, and ultimately just making sure we're ready for those upcoming advanced group preparation sessions as well. So Sarah, I'll turn it to you. Any other comments you want to make about what's coming up next?
Let me get my, excuse me, get my video back on. And I'm gonna actually take that down and stop sharing so everybody can see us well during our question and answer. You did a fantastic job. I don't know if you guys noticed the agenda at the beginning also had time estimations. Well, Callie hit it on the head. Like we have 10 minutes left exactly to answer any questions. I hope you found that informative and that you understand that there was a lot of preparation and thought into making the decisions that we're making for training. InfoPro and CGI actually have definitely helped us understand where we were and where we could be. And hopefully it is something that will help with that transition. The only thing I want to talk about before I go into the question and answers, excuse me, is I know that somebody mentioned that they were concerned about like what they would be teaching. And this is my fault for probably not making this as clear. I'm hoping that this will alleviate some anxiety too that I'm sure we're all experiencing. New platform, new training, is that really those virtual instructor-led sessions are going to be the ones that you as a trainer are responsible for teaching. I'm not saying you won't get questions from your end users about the other assets, but let me alleviate a little bit of it and know that you'll only be responsible for those virtual instructor-led sessions, which is actually only 6 hours of the 13 hours total. So hopefully that helps a little bit, but let's go into your awesome questions. And Imani and Jamie are joining us again to help me. So in the next session, when will we be introduced to training content? Great question. So the next session is a learning showcase. And then after that will be when you have what we refer to as the first content drop. It will be something that you will be accessing in the LMS, and we will provide more information about that. We won't just say, go and figure it out. We'll absolutely have instructions for how to access it and when to review what. why will support be only by appointment after go live? Great question. So the reason we're setting it up like that, I don't know if you recall, but Shane has absolutely talked about some, for lack of a better term, office hours that we'll be having. And we want to set up appointments for that for a couple reasons. One, we want to make sure that we know who's asking the questions so that we can prepare for your session. And we want to make sure that we're capturing that information. So in case we see any trends of a lot of folks are having the same question, maybe that means that we need to make one of our trainings a little more robust, or maybe it means we need to add an asset. It's that constant feedback loop that will help us to determine if we need to change anything or add anything or remove anything. So that support by appointment only. Any Android users out there, sorry for this reference, but it's kind of like an Apple Genius Bar appointment, we're hoping. We can kind of be cool like the Apple folks. So that is the reason for that. Hopefully that answered your question. Next up, can you tell us where the review introductory video and process infographic? This was on Thursday's timeline. It absolutely was. And you will be getting the process flow infographic today. There'll be two. There'll be one for buyers and one for suppliers that you'll be reviewing. Again, it's just giving you that opportunity to kind of put your toe in the water and get used to reviewing assets. When will we start actually learning the process of using the new system instead of the process of how it was developed? Great question. So I thought this might come up, and think of these 3 sessions as kind of like your onboarding as a trainer. So think of it as you've started a new part of your position as a trainer, and we want to make sure that you're introduced and understand what went into it so that you can better be prepared when you are reviewing the actual assets, which again will happen next week. We'll be sending you information about where to access the assets and what we're looking for from you. So great question. So think about this again as you're being onboarded as a trainer, and then next week you'll get to jump into the actual tasks. When will we start receiving the materials? Are these going to be posted on LMS? I kind of already answered this, but just to go over it again, because I know that a lot of people are anxious to get started. You'll start receiving them next week, and they will be posted on the MLS. It's not necessarily a question about today's training, but more of a scheduling question. Next week, I have another obligation. I was wondering when we'll find out the training sessions for next week. So there actually won't be training sessions in the sense that what we're doing right now, it will be those self-paced assets that we're going to need you to review. And as I mentioned, there will be a communication about that, where to access them, when to access them, and what we're looking for from you as trainers, which remember a little bit on the kickoff session, I talked about this. It's more reviewing as a trainer and not reviewing to make changes necessarily, unless it's a big change that we somehow missed in our initial reviews, and we'll have to make that change. You are so welcome. We would like to take advantage of some learning journeys, but not all. Is that acceptable? We'll be able to track user training. Great questions. You can absolutely take advantage of some of the journeys. If you don't have somebody that falls into a specific role, therefore falls into a specific learning journey, you might not use that one, which is absolutely fine. As I mentioned last week, we do have recommended training journeys that are based on the data that we pulled from current eVA over the past 2 years. And if you think that for some reason one of your users doesn't have the correct journey, all you have to do is let us know and we can make those changes. Will there be training on how to access and use the reports? So remember that Logi is coming over, so that won't be anything that's changed, but that's still a great question, and it's absolutely something we're working on for both post go live, excuse me. So we'll be able to kind of roll that out a little separately, but that is an area that most are familiar with because we're using Logi as of today. And will testing be LMS led? So testing will take place in the testing environment. So as far as I know, and there'll be more information on this, it won't be in the LMS. We'll get those people that have signed up for testing, which by the way, thank you. I'm sure some of our trainers are also serving as testers, and we appreciate that because we know it's just additional work for you all, but it really, really helps us. So hopefully Lisa's clapping her hands as she's watching this as I'm like, do testing if you want to. Encourage your users to participate in testing if they want to. All good, good things, but answer to that is no, as far as I know. Once the self-paced learning drops for us trainers, how long do we have to complete them? Great question. So that will depend on what the drop contains, right? So if we need you to review bigger amounts of, I was about to say data, but more assets than a different drop, then you'll have a little bit more time. And if for some reason you guys aren't feeling the amount of time, it's too much, it's too little, let us know. As I mentioned, you guys as trainers are kind of like also our pilot end users as we go through this. So you kind of get to be our guinea pigs, for lack of a better term. And that way you get to see all of the assets first. And hopefully that counteracts that extra work you have to do as a trainer to prepare for the system. Hopefully that's like a little carrot for you. So thanks for being a trainer. You get to see everything first, but we do need you to do a little bit extra work. Who is responsible for tracking user training? Will the trainers have the ability, or is it you? Great idea. So great question. So we came up with the idea you're absolutely going to be able to track your user training. This is where our amazing account executives are going to come into play, and they will be able to see who's done what. And what we're hoping to do is send you all reports of your end users and what they've taken, what they've started, what they still need to finish, so that you can have a better idea of that. So, and I think that was part of another question that I did not answer previously. So thank you, Vicki, for adding that. We are almost at the top of the hour. We have 2 more questions, and then we will go ahead and end for the day. Can we have access to these learning templates? I think you mean learning journeys, I think, Kim, and in that case, they will absolutely be listed on the training website, which will go live on Friday. You'll be able to access and view exactly what different roles we'll be taking. And then finally, if you're on vacation next week, will you still be able to review the assets for the week you're not available? Yes, we'll try to be flexible with everyone. If for some reason you are on vacation, I don't want to say, hey, make sure you review all these when you come in from the beach or wherever you're going. But we can absolutely try to work with everyone's schedules. And if there's something that you miss, it might just be that you missed the review for that period of time. But I'm hoping with what the time we're giving people, you should be able to review it when you come back from vacation or before you leave for vacation. So I think that was all the questions, and it is exactly 11. So I told the other lovely panelists here that I was probably going to take over the question and answer session, similar to how I did on Thursday, just because I'm a tiny bit of a control freak, but it's like, I just get on a roll, guys, and you're asking good questions. So I'm just started to go. So hopefully, thankfully, these ladies are used to working with me, and they know that sometimes I'm just like, I'll do it. So if you have any other questions, please let us know. Get excited for the Thursday learning showcase. And then remember, also at the end of the week, you will all be getting an awesome link to our amazing training page, which I can't wait for all of you to see. So I will let you all go back to your busy Mondays. Have a fantastic day and rest of the week, and hopefully we'll get to talk to you on Thursday. Bye now.